If you're ready to move on, Mr. Chairman, we do have another related item that we want to visit with you about pertaining to the WMI action plan.
Okay.
As all of you, I'm sure, recall, we have spent a lot of time at these meetings over the course of this last year discussing our action plan or the results of that action plan that we crafted in response to the review that the Wildlife Management Institute performed for us. What we have for you here is a compilation of all of those reports that we have presented to you over the course of this last year. We also thought it was fitting for us to maybe give a review. We certainly don't have time to go through everything in the same detail that we spent the entire last year on, but we do want to try to give a quick overview of some of the highlights and just to again sum up a lot of the changes that have occurred within our agency as a result of the independent review that was conducted by the Wildlife Management Institute. In that action plan, there was one item that we were due to report to you on at this meeting, and before we get to the PowerPoint, I'm going to go ahead and let Tom present that action item here, which pertains to those minimum thresholds for changing regulations.
So it fits in very well of kind of our discussion here about deer licenses in general. And in your booklet, if you would turn to the tab marked December, we'll have your sheet for you. It's just one page of this month's WMI report here. And the one item that we had scheduled for the month of December to discuss and just bring forward information to you is the concept Tony just mentioned. That's minimum thresholds. And what do we mean by that? Every year, regardless of which season it is, that has a limited number of licenses: East River deer season, West River deer season, spring turkey, individual units, seasons like that where we have limited number of licenses. Every year through that season setting process and going through recommendations, starting all the way down from our conservation officers, wildlife damage specialists, visiting with landowners, and then developing, working with the regional wildlife managers in the regions, on up to our CRD process, and ultimately to you, the commission, recommendations for changes or adjustments to license numbers and types occurs every year. And in some instances, there's no changes for an individual unit. Depending on what the circumstances were, that maybe there's a very significant change in licenses. But every year there's always a handful of units or certain units that we happen to make minimal changes. And minimal can be open to your interpretation, I guess, as well, depending on the circumstance and why you'd consider making changes. But through that process, oftentimes, the two main reasons why we would make change are, number one, biological reasons because of the population status or something that happened. And number two would be for social reasons, whether it's landowner tolerance, some other issues going out there, or maybe the third option, obviously, is a combination of the two. And so that's what our staff looks at on an annual basis on that license allocation. What we also know when we do these changes to individual management unit and license numbers is the places that we need to make changes. And if you look at the top there under process number 4, gives you a handful of places where at minimum we need to make changes if changes occur. Not only on the action sheets that we bring forward to you as the commission for your consideration, but if passed, then through all the actual administrative rules and through the LRC and interim rules process, to the hunting applications, to the website, to our hunter harvest survey. There's just a plethora of locations that we need to make sure that we are accurate in making those adjustments in there, if we do make an adjustment to license numbers. And so where we have the discussions every year, at times, depending on the season, is we have a couple of units where we're making nominal or minimal change. And then the question always comes up, is it necessary or needed to make that change for that small of a number? Is it really going to have an impact on whatever our objective might be? And so we went through that process and looked at a couple of different ways of trying to establish that minimum threshold before a change should take place. And to no surprise, there's no perfect fit for every scenario out there because this management unit could be different than this one. This one has different number of licenses already compared to this one. So we didn't find that one fit that fits every situation, but what we have come up with is a couple of things just want to share with you. Number one is that our discussion at last month's commission meeting about a multi-year season setting schedule quite honestly addresses most of this. Going on a 2-year or 3-year cycle, 2-year in particular for our big game seasons that we really focus changes on license number, deer, antelope, elk, turkey, those in particular. Going to that multi-year schedule will actually probably address the vast majority of those situations where we're making minimum changes on an annual basis. Because as we go through that process moving forward and we're thinking about, okay, we're setting these allocations for 2 years, that's going to address a lot of that. So in our conversations, we really feel that that multi-year schedule has one more benefit moving forward versus the benefits that we all talked about in taking that type of approach. But another thing that we talked about and we're going to set forward, and we do this already, but I think this puts a more formal approach to it. When we have those individual units where we're going to consider changes of approximately 25 or less, we need to have some real hard questions asked, do some thorough discussions about it, have our staff provide the regional supervisors and regional wildlife managers some written justification or rationale for why we need to make that type of change. And in some instances, there's most definitely a very valid reason for making those types of changes. But in other circumstances, maybe we're just trying to be too finite and micromanaging and we're just not that good and we can't be that accurate. So we're just going to make sure that as we do that on an annual basis or biannual, depending on the season, that we're going to be asking those hard questions and making sure that that change or adjustment is necessary and has merit and warranted. And if it does, then absolutely we'll bring it forward as a recommendation to you, the commission. Obviously, we have those units that have a very small number, some of our limited access units. We have some of those units especially set aside for those disabled hunts. Those are at 5 and 10 and 15. Obviously, 25 does not apply to those. But if we're even going to make a small adjustment there, we want to have that thorough discussion and make sure that any type of change is warranted and has the merit to do that. And again, we want to make sure that we are making any type of adjustments based on both biological and social reasons and make sure that we articulate and explain why that would and which objectives we're meeting. So, and then last thing I'd say about the thresholds is that as we continue down our path of this conscious effort of management plans, where appropriate, where it would best fit in, those plans will also include maybe some parameters and guidelines on minimum thresholds that should be considered in the overall season structures and licenses and things like that. And where appropriate, then we'll try to include those in management plans as well. So that, Mr. Chairman, is just a brief overview of some of our discussions and kind of how we're going to progress forward here in our license allocations and considering those minor changes at times for individual units themselves. Okay. That'll answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for Tom. I know, Scott, you'd had a issue that we kind of discussed the last couple of days, and maybe you want to visit with Tom real here.
My concern was, for instance, we've been working on this elk management plan, and it's new, and we don't know exactly how successful or unsuccessful it's going to be. And we've just come out with this plan to only look at elk every 2 years. Would it behoove us to make an exception and look at elk every year for 3 years because of the new plan that we're coming out with, so the staff would be able to tell the landowners, if you've got a problem, we're going to look at elk every year for 3 years. It's not on the every other year plan. We're going to make an exception. I know Gary's worked on this elk plan. We could maybe hear his opinion. I'd like to hear your opinion. If it should be looked at every year for a year or two by the commission instead of on alternate years.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because that was a discussion that we had internally when we were talking about putting together that multi-season or multi-year season structure. And I did not bring a copy with me, but for elk, we will be looking at it for 2 years before we actually move into that 2-year cycle. And probably two main reasons for that. Number one, that you just mentioned about with the elk plan just coming to fruition, moving forward with the management plan as our guiding document to manage elk in South Dakota. But then the second reason is we are scheduled to do our next complete aerial flight of the Black Hills in the winter of 2016, so just a little over a year from now. And so we would plan to use that information at that point in time from our population standpoint, then to go ahead and bring forward recommendations to you, the commission, in March of 2016. That would be going out for 2 years. So we will be looking at elk over the next 2 years, 2 years in a row before we actually go into that 2-year cycle. So I hope that addresses your question, your concern.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll follow that up just to ask you to, in anticipation of presentation of the elk management plan, we do have another component of that plan to try to address some of those issues that we may encounter with periods of drought in particular, in the license allocation and how that might be adjusted if those things happen. And again, I'll just let you know that's a discussion that's going to be had here in just a few minutes when we have Chad and Andy get up here. So it'll lead well into that.
Okay, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Lots of work, Tom. We really appreciate the efforts.
Yeah.
It's a nice summary for us to hold on to.
Mr. Chairman, if it's all right with you, we'd like to kind of briefly go over this. And once again, we spent a lot of time on this. This is kind of just a quick overview of all the accomplishments over the course of this last year. We'll try not to go to those in detail. I think we're doing all right for time, but we don't need to replow all this ground other than just to give an overview of what we've accomplished this last year. But just quickly, timeline of the events. By the way, Tom and I will double team this one. I'll start it off with the first portion and then hand it off to Tom to finish up. Timeline of events, it was last September when the Wildlife Management Institute issued their report as the results of the review that they conducted of our big game management program. All of you, well, those of you that were there, I guess Paul wasn't on the commission then, but at your October meeting out in Spearfish, Steve Williams was there to present the report. Actually, I remember that was the day I met Commissioner Scott Phillips, so he was even there for that. I don't know if you remember that presentation or not then, before he was actually on the commission. And then a month later, we came to you with a 43-point action plan. That action plan not only contained things that we were going to do, but it also contained dates and when we were going to get all those items done, which was very important for us to be able to be accountable for the information that was contained within the report and the recommendations for changes. When we looked at the report, there were 4 primary areas of focus that we saw within the report that where improvements could be made. They included communication, commission recommendation development process, management plans, and population monitoring. We crafted all the action items within each of these components and then went to work on separate actions to accomplish each of these. Now, it's very important to note that these are not totally independent of each other. There's a lot of overlap. Obviously, communication affects all of them. Management plans affect how we're going to develop recommendation. Population monitoring affects how those recommendations are going to come forth. So there's a lot of overlap, but by and large, these were the 4 main program areas that we looked at. I'm going to cover communication here first. We were at a meeting here a couple days ago. Some of you were there, and the state conservationist, Jeff Simprich, made a comment that was very fitting. He said, I sit and think I always have to do more collaboration. And I think you could insert the word communication for collaboration with what he said that day. It's impossible to do too much collaboration or to do too much communication. And certainly there were some places where we could improve. But there's always room for more communication, both internally and externally. So it started with last summer, we had a conference with our staff, and this is focusing on the internal communication of the recommendations within the report. But we discussed our guidance document, which all of you have received a copy of before. But within that, it makes a commitment to communication. And that communication is to have a proper logic for decision making that begins at the grassroots of our level of our agency. That includes listening to the people that are on the ground level and trying to formulate policies, recommendations, and important decisions that we operate under within the Wildlife Division. And that includes seeking that appropriate level of staff involvement on those important decisions. Now, it's important to note that listening and formulating opinions from the folks that we work with doesn't always translate into doing exactly what everybody or exactly what some members of staff think we should do. I mean, that's a process that's going through in developing those decisions and ensure that there's a proper level of input. Most of the time, consensus is there and it's the right decision. But most often, or excuse me, on occasion, decisions that are made may not fall entirely in line with the communication or the recommendations that came up through staff. Again, this links back to that CRD process, remembering that the whole process, when it gets done in the end, is that we bring you a recommendation that's built from the bottom up within our agency. So the last component is really important there, that if there are some adjustments that may occur to recommendations, that there's feedback on that. And that feedback comes from us. It doesn't come from reading it in the newspaper of what the action that the commission took. So there's our commitment to what we want to accomplish, and a commitment without implementation really is of little value. So here's what we've done to try to implement what our commitment was. What we wanted to do as senior managers is try to make sure that we ensure that opportunities are there for this two-way communication to occur. In particular, that means getting out and listening to what folks have to say, and one of the best means of doing that is to get to our regional meetings. Regional meetings have most of the staff within sections of the state, and I personally have made more of those in this last year than probably the previous 2 or 3 years combined. It's a matter of setting priorities. I can tell you that I missed out on some things in Pierre in favor of getting out to a regional meeting and to hear what folks have to say. The other thing is we have a structure in this state, a management structure that's where the authority is decentralized. It's something that we take pride in that we have our regional supervisors out there, both in the Wildlife Division and in the Parks Division, that carry with them a great deal of authority in our decisions. And it's important to ensure that they are included on those important decisions because they are the conduit or the connection that we have with our central office out with our field staff. And another thing that we did this year, that third checkpoint, was we had these section resource discussions. We had 4 different meetings over the course of this last year to sit down and review how we operate as an agency. They included the regional supervisors and the senior program administrators within administration, terrestrial resources, aquatic resources, and law enforcement. In response to those meetings, we also have an action plan. It's a draft action plan that we put together right now that we will be implementing to make improvements in our internal management of the agency. Key to communications is identifying the roles and responsibilities of staff, and our big game and our regional staff went through a process to ensure that everybody knew what their lines of responsibility were, because there was a little bit of fuzziness at times about who was responsible for what. Next thing we've implemented is our informal meetings with staff. I mean, formal opportunities when we're together as a group don't always solicit a sufficient input, and there are some people that are more comfortable just talking to you one-on-one. And so this was another key element that we worked towards is trying to make some individual contacts and ensuring that people know that we're open to suggestions by seeking out those communications rather than just waiting for those folks to come in and visit with us. And then again, as I said before, getting our senior managers out to those regional meetings is a key way to get that input. And then the other follow-up that we've done, if you remember the feedback portion of that, is to get some communication follow-up. And this is something that Tom is taking the lead on, is getting communication back out to the staff or work on the development of our recommendations that we have for the agency. Now, it doesn't necessarily fit strictly into communication, but one of the recommendations or one of the things that the WMI staff heard frequently in their review was that there was a lot of people that really thought highly of our professional development program that we previously had in the state that was kind of stagnant at the time and needed some revitalization. So we've done that. In fact, just earlier this week, I sent an email out to staff to let them know that we're back up and running on this professional and leadership development. It starts with this career development program, a standalone self-directed program. There are a number of opportunities available within Bureau of Human Resources. And what this does is essentially allows each employee to work with their supervisor to identify a process or a set of courses that they can go through to graduate, if you will, from this leadership or for the career development program. Now, what these career development program trainings do is set the stage for the leadership development program. And this is going to be a little bit more formalized. It's going to include workshops. I can tell you this was the key that was very important to my professional development in this agency, is getting the opportunity to participate in these workshops where we bring in experts on some of these courses or example courses that you'll see down there in conflict management, adaptive leadership, public involvement, and working effectively in teams. Now, the difference between these is anybody can get into the career development program thing. When you start bringing in speakers and scheduling classes, we're going to have to limit that because of the number of people that you can put in a room and have an effective training program. So what we'll do is put together this curriculum, and then we'll seek input or applications from our staff, coordinating with their supervisor to get into some of this training. But I have to tell you, I've found this training highly valuable, not only for my professional life, but for my personal life. And some of you that have attended some of these types of trainings realize that they're life valuable, not just work valuable. The other component that we've made some substantial progress on this past year is in the communications that we have with the public. And Emily has spent a lot of time over the course of this last year. I won't go through those in a lot of detail, but here are some of those improvements that were made this last year, including mass emails, Twitter accounts, the YouTube, the blog, our improved website, which was launched in July, and the social platforms that make things a lot easier. Also, Cindy has reported to you throughout the course of this past year on some of the enhanced communications we have with our public using our surveys and other human dimension techniques, including collecting that data, ongoing management process, assisting stakeholder group meetings, and then planning and evaluating some of those public input strategies, exploring alternate tools. She's here pretty much on a monthly basis to tell you a little bit more of what we've learned or a little bit more about our communications with the public and how we're trying to connect better with them. With that, I'll hand to Tom for the last three subject areas.
That was the exciting stuff. That was the exciting stuff, and now he's going to turn it over to me for the grinder part of this. Yes. So I'm going to cover the last three priority focus areas that Tony mentioned there at the beginning of the presentation. And the first one is the CRD process, or the Commission Recommendation Development process. And there was a lot of talk within the report itself about many things that Tony has mentioned about from communication, but there was also specific things identified in the report that we could do to improve the overall CRD process as well. And some of the things that we have worked on over this last year and kind of implemented in particular is to providing that direction to everybody so we're all on the same page as we move forward through that annual process. And we started it this last year where Tony, the director of the Wildlife Division, came in and spoke to all the folks involved with the CRD meetings, all the way from regional supervisors to managers to biologists and other folks down the line. And we talked about things that we want to think about moving forward, some guidance directions of things of consideration as we go through the process this year. And I think that was very helpful that everybody understood where we're going. Questions could be laid out on the table at that time so we're all on the same page moving forward. And we'll continue to do that. And at the same time, with the winter fish meetings on the aquatic side of management as well. The other thing that we've done, and we're trying to do a more concerted effort as well, is if staff is identifying an issue out there that could be pretty high profile or potentially controversial, we want to bring that topic up several months in advance of the actual CRD meeting and prior to the commission meeting so that, number one, we can have some internal discussions several months in advance, get some input, and if we really see that it's an item that we should come and visit with you folks as well before we even start the overall CRD process, we have that opportunity to do that just so that we're all aware of that particular topic and where we might want to go with that. As mentioned by Tony in the communications section, again, this shows the overlap of all these areas is really that feedback. One of the things that was identified in the report is at times if adjustments are made or changes are made, folks want to know why and what the discussion was and what's the reasoning behind those things. And so we really talked about that a lot with the management staff and everybody involved in the process, and in particular in CRD here. So for example, if we, during the CRD meeting, we ask questions about those license allocations, kind of like we talked about those thresholds, why are we doing this, or why would you take that management approach? And so if it's a unit-specific type thing, that's going to be dependent on that wildlife manager to go back, have those conversations with those local staff, and talk about those changes if changes are needed. If it's something that really affects a region, that's really going to be incumbent upon that regional supervisor to notify staff. Something that's more at a broader scale or a statewide level, we need to provide that, and we do that feedback from either the assistant director or the appropriate section chief. And just going on down the line from final department recommendations to commission meeting itself, as Tony mentioned, we've started a process where after every commission meeting, we'll send out a note to staff describing what actions took place, and then if any changes did occur, what was the discussion and what were the reasons for those changes to the department recommendations or your proposal itself. Again, just as an opportunity to keep everybody in the loop and everybody understands why things took place and what was the reasoning behind it. A big part of the CRD process now that is different than from many years past is that reliance on management plans. And obviously we've talked about management plans a lot this last year. We've had some very key successes in management plans, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But what we do know now is that those management plans are the guiding document to the whole CRD process, because those management plans do outline what are our objectives and where do we want to go. How are we going to manage this particular critter, its habitats, and so forth. And obviously it's going to include many things from license and season structures. These plans are also very dependent on public input and adopted by you, the commission. And as I talked about in that last bullet there that we spoke a few minutes ago about those minimum thresholds, all those types of things are in those management plans, but at the end of the day, the management plans are really going to drive and dictate the whole CRD process and where we're going with managing those critters. One of the main things that came out of our discussions this past year in regards to the CRD process is the multi-year season setting schedule, regulation schedule, and we talked about all those pros and cons. Again, at the end of the day, what we're really looking at is those big game seasons on a 2-year rotation. Many other seasons, such as upland game, depredation hunts, things like that, will be on more of a 3-year rotation just because there's typically very minimal or no changes to those types of seasons or regulations. And again, as we talked about, this will provide more time for staff on other management activities that need to take place on those individual species or other activities need to occur, and from the commission standpoint, more time and opportunity to focus on some larger issues and topics of discussion that need to occur on that annual basis. From a fishery side, it's a little bit different. When we think of on the wildlife side and the CRD process, you've been through the schedules. It's like every month we have different seasons that are coming forward, different regulations. On the fishery side, it's typically that one time a year where those recommendations come forward for fishing regulations and associated activities for that. I know John and Lot and I have had several discussions about the CRD process itself, and those managers in the fishery side as well, looking at how our schedule is set up because of all the different seasons, looking at some ways that they can include some similar components that we do on the wildlife side just because of our schedule, in terms of more interaction with staff, more staff input, and try to follow somewhat of a similar format, even though they're not going to be coming as often, obviously, as we do for the hunting seasons and regulations. Next section or focus area is management plans. And I will tell you, over the last year, we've probably spent more time and resources, and in particular staff time, on management plans than we did the previous 5 years. And some of those plans were working into this last year, but with the recommendations of the importance and necessity of management plans to guide all of us, including the public, we've really had a cultural change on how we're approaching management. And management plans, at the end of the day, are the foundation of what we need to work off of and what we'll continue to work off of. And really, the beginning of every management plan, the cornerstone of it, is the guiding document for the Division of Wildlife, because that dictates what we are, who we're about, and what our objectives are in terms of managing those resources for our public. And so really every management plan branches off of our guiding document as a division itself. But within these management plans, obviously there's agency guidance, how we're going to move forward managing those critters. There's the public involvement, which is really important from an ownership from the public as well. If you remember from WMI, when they presented the final report to you, the commission, and the public, they really stressed and identified the importance of having the public engaged in the process and having a level of ownership in it, that it's not just a management plan for the department and the commission moving forward. And so we've done conscious efforts to include the public. And at the end of the day, it's really that document that articulates the direction and the approved management in the direction we're going. From the management plans themselves, with our new concerted effort, there's an overall approach which really provides specifics on objectives and how do we meet our objectives, guidance to the agency, the public input through university applied and structured approach. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those approaches, but from surveys that Dr. Lawnmoyer assists everybody with, and to public meetings, to stakeholder groups, various components like that. Obviously, another significant change of management plans that we are embarking on is obviously the engagement as you as the commission, and your involvement not only in the planning and thinking of the whole plan itself, but at the conclusion of those management plans as a formal adoption by you as the guiding document for management in the future. The process itself of management plans obviously starts at the with all of our staff. Obviously, depending on the plan itself, there's going to be multiple staff actively engaged in writing, putting the information together. But at the end of the day, whether you are or not, everybody's going to have an opportunity to provide input on the management plans through an internal process, review process, before it even goes out to the public. So that assures all staff see that document and have an opportunity to provide input if they choose to do so. Public surveys, we've done multiple surveys over the last 2 years that have been instrumental in drafting and guiding the direction of those management plans, because ultimately these plans are also going to be trying to accommodate the needs of our constituents out there, whether it's a sportsman, a landowner, or whoever it might be. Public involvement in stakeholder groups, working groups. Every management plan obviously has either public meetings, they have special interest groups that are involved early in the process. The elk management plan, which we'll talk a little bit more about, we specifically had a stakeholder group that I think we all feel was very instrumental and very informative for us as we move forward. And then obviously it ends with a public comment period before it comes forward to you, the commission, for a formal adoption. From the staff part of management plans, again, this is somewhat of a cultural change, and we're having a much higher emphasis on drafting and utilization of management plans. And in some cases, in the example of the elk management plan, that was starting from scratch. We did not have a previous elk management plan. And so obviously we have to allocate the time, the resources to put these things together, which at times means prioritizing other duties and activities, but understanding that the importance of these management plans are going to benefit everybody. And when I say everybody, again, I refer to you, the commission, us as a department, and the public as well. We also wanted to make sure, because of the emphasis, that we incorporated the drafting and writing of management plans in our PR survey grant, so that we can document and record our time and the amount of time that we're spending on this, to use federal dollars to assist in those efforts. And then also from management plans themselves, we're essentially have a schedule where we're going to review these management plans, again, months in advance of the CRD process, to make sure that we are going in the direction that the management plan outlined for all of us to move forward on. And that just has to be part of that whole CRD process as well. Just to hit on a few accomplishments looking back over this past year, and many of these were identified in the WMI report itself, in our action plan, and some other things that we've just been working on. But for example, the mountain lion management plan, there was one item that said to specifically identify what that population objective is of that 175 plus or minus. We made that adjustment in the mountain lion management plan back in January and brought that forward to you for approval. In April, the fisheries staff brought forward the overall fisheries management plan, which included several area strategic plans, and you, the commission, did a final approval during that time frame. I believe as we were down in Yankton, Eileen Dowd gave you a presentation on the State Wildlife Action Plan, which quite honestly was an effort that accumulated over about 3 years, 2.5 years, of a very instrumental document and a very good document for our State Wildlife Action Plan. There were some specific items outlined in the WMI report that we should make some clarity, and in particular one was on some unit-specific objectives for the Pronghorn management plan. Staff worked really well and hard on that, got that put together, brought that forward, and you, the commission, adopted that in October. Greater sage grouse management plan, again, another plan that had been in the works for about 2 years, and we finally got to where we needed to be, and you adopted that in November. And the last one there is the elk management plan, which again, Andy and Chad are going to talk a little bit more here in detail after this presentation, but that's a significant one as well. One of a high profile, one of high interest from our sportsmen and landowners out there, and it's a big document. Many of our plans are not that long, but this is a big one. It has a lot of information, but again, this is an opportunity where we had, and we're taking full advantage of it. Again, this is one that we started from scratch, and there was a lot of work. And I will tell you, the accumulation of all these things up here, all these plans, are a high, an incredible effort by staff, and the amount of time they put in. And those folks really deserve a lot of accolades for all the work that they did on these, because it sure wasn't us sitting up here. Our staff did a wonderful job in putting all these things together, and deserve a lot of credit moving forward with these management plans. And then the last focus area is on population monitoring. There were several recommendations, and again, it focused primarily on big game populations, but there are things that do spill over into other management and population monitoring as well. But in particular, a couple items from deer population monitoring. You know, we're working with SDSU on a couple of projects in particular on deer for fall composition surveys to get a better handle on how we really need to conduct the survey. What is our true sample size needed that we have statistically sound and valid data to use in our population modeling and following the changes in our overall deer population out there. Another project we have that will be completed this year is a project working with SDSU is an evaluation and monitoring standpoint to estimate deer population in the Black Hills as well. We've had a lot of discussions about how many deer in the hills, what's the population doing. We have some good observations, we have some other data, but this will be another tool in our box that will help us in better managing the deer in the Black Hills as well. Our staff has worked hard on doing some more statistical work with our data that we have right now and trying to make those more robust in terms of confidence intervals, so we have the best available data that is available to us to use in monitoring and assessing deer populations. And then they also developed a field guide to help staff as they're out there doing the composition surveys. So a couple of things that we've tried to accomplish in deer. Another one from a deer management perspective that was implemented here in 2014 that we visited with you, the commission, about when we actually brought forward all the deer recommendations was kind of this matrix approach, in particular on antlerless deer harvest. And it's really focuses on the various types of seasons and license types over here under the concept of a liberal, moderate, and restrictive harvest. And it really depends on where we're at in those individual management units, what's our approach, where do we want to go, and helps outline to staff and the folks in the public where we're going and how we're going about it. And I would have fully expected to see this will be broadened and expanded as we go through the deer management plan process, starting here as soon as we conclude the elk management plan. Another item that was brought up in the report and was recommended, and staff were in total agreement with this one, because in fact we were having discussions about this already, is some data analysis units. And really the concept of using some bigger geographic areas to gather data, use data that we have, and help better manage our deer populations, not only from the license perspective, but also monitoring and through modeling. And so we've established these our data analysis units. We have some internal projects where we are, and we've presented some information earlier this year about how we're collaring does and fawns out there to better understand survival, mortality, recruitment, which will all play into better monitoring the populations and our modeling that we're doing. And when we finish an actual study that we have going on with the University of Montana right now, we will then finalize what those data analysis units will be. So these are kind of our tentative or draft ones, and probably anticipate to see some adjustments to those as we move forward. I just mentioned talking about statistical assistance. That was something that was brought up in the report as well. We continue to have a great relationship, and we continue to use the expertise that we have with our partners over at SDSU in their wildlife department, natural resource department. Those folks have helped us out for many years in modeling and looking at populations, surveys approach, and we continue to utilize them. We've also branched out and working with a population model expert from the University of Montana. And one of those things actually results in a project that we started this year. And I know that the development of a SQL Server database in our software package is way over my head as well, but I just wanted to put the title in there as well. Bottom line, it is a population modeling project that we're working with this expert from Montana to develop this model that we can then enter all the data we have plus new data that we will gather to better monitor and estimate what's happening with our deer populations out there. And again, that started this year. Pronghorn, very similar to what we talked about with deer. We have that project going on with SDSU for our composition surveys. That'll be completed this year, making our data more statistically robust. And again, the development of field guide to help staff as they're out there collecting that data and training staff in regards to using those guides. As we talk about staff, we have a grant through our PR grant for surveys, which includes all of our surveys from deer, pronghorn, elk, pheasant, duck, you name it. We have to do that on an annual basis, submit a new grant application, which is a great opportunity for us to then review it at the same time and make appropriate adjustments on an annual basis. Another key part of monitoring populations is training to staff, and that really happens primarily at our regional meetings where the wildlife managers and our biologists are going to be visiting with staff about new survey protocols, new surveys themselves, adjustments to the current methods that we use. For those experienced staff, it's more brushing up, going over it again, make sure that if there's any questions to be answered, we do that. For new staff, it's a more concerted effort, spending more time with them, having the appropriate manager, biologist going out with staff as they learn those survey methods, or spending time with another experienced staff that knows how to do the survey and they can learn from them as well. Population monitoring from the public standpoint, our number one tool is the hunter-harvest survey. There's by no question the number one piece of information that we used over the years, and that is the deer harvested, the success of our hunters. That type of information has always been used and will continue to be used in our license allocations. Some of the things that we have done and will continue to do and maybe even enhance is on the survey responses themselves, continue to look at those non-response surveys to determine any correction factors that we need to employ on when we do the analysis of our surveys. And just as important that we believe is to make the public understand why it's so important that we get this information from them, because it is important in setting the season structures and the license allocations and to manage those critters. Sometimes, depending on those individual surveys, it's almost apparent in talking to some of the folks that they don't truly understand the real need and necessity of that. So we're doing a conscious effort to get that message out to our folks so they understand why they get all these surveys and how we utilize them. And we'll use various means to get that out. And I will tell you, we have two things in place right now that Cindy and other folks are working on, is actual article in the Conservation Digest about a hunter-harvest survey and what we do with the information and why it's important to get it. We're doing a draft revision on the website again, further explaining that, and we'll use all of our other outreach tools as well to get people aware of why those surveys come out and how we use it and why we need them to return it. Another thing in regards to the public is the use of human dimensions in wildlife management. We've talked about this already. We continue to utilize human dimensions to collect relevant data on ongoing management and planning processes. We're going to look to actually improve the current methods that we use right now. We have open houses, we have public meetings, and we bring people together and we talk to them and collect information. And what we need to assure as we continue to move forward is that we're asking the right questions and we're going about it the right way. So whatever information we do collect is meaningful and be a useful tool in our planning process. And also to help in the facilitation of working with small groups and stakeholders. We've done that already, and Cindy's been very instrumental. I speak from example in the elk management plan. She did that survey, came and described the information to our stakeholders so they better understood what that information meant as well. And one other thing in regards to the public is that was specifically identified in the plan or the report itself was how do you use that information you collect from landowners on an annual basis, in particular from conservation officers. We know our officers out there are the frontline people that constantly have that communication and discussions with landowners about what's the status of deer on your property, what are you seeing, what are your issues, concerns, what do you see out there? And it's very difficult to quantify what that information is. So with our GIS staff, human dimension staff, and our biologists and managers, we've put together essentially a very similar program that we use, and we presented to this back in May or June, if I remember right, to you, the draft concept. It's a very similar format we do when we're out collecting surveys, but this would be an opportunity that an officer has a discussion with a landowner and landowners. He can go in quickly, put that in there, and we have a way to quantify that information. We can gather it all up in a report and use that in our recommendation process as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman and Commissions, that's a quick review of the four main focus areas of a year-end review of all of that. And I just put that slide, it kind of dictates what this whole thing does. You know, it really starts at the beginning of our discussions of all the information, both internally and with our public. We'll continue to enhance our population monitoring and modeling of our populations out there, ultimately with hopefully that management approach that's going to make people successful and enjoying the outdoor resources that we have in South Dakota. So with that, we'll sure try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tom. Questions for Tom or Tony? Go ahead, Gary.
I just have a comment. I'd like to thank you and the department for everything you've done responding to this report. I think it's been thoughtful and meaningful and very helpful, and makes it much easier for us to do what we're supposed to do. I think it's been tremendous, and I think you should be commended for it. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Jerry, thank you. I'd like just to add, Tom or Tony, I can't remember which, mentioned the effort that the staff has put in trying to improve our process and how we do it. And from my seat here, I would tell you that I've seen just a tremendous improvement in the quality of our presentations and these management plans. I think are phenomenal when you talk about the health management plan. That one I gotta say it blows me away. It's really, really well done. In my opinion, you'll have your opportunity to offer your own. So Tony and Tom, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And please thank the rest of the staff. You guys really do a great job.
I have one comment too. Doing 6 management plans in 1 year is amazing. I don't know how you could even do that. I hope you can stagger the updates over different years so that it isn't quite so intense for you to do that.
Next year will really count for dozens.
No, the bulk of the action items were due to be completed and delivered to you in the first year, because we really felt like we needed to get going now. So the bulk of the reports and the bulk of the actions did come in the first year. There will be some more. We will be reporting to you over the course of this next year, but they will not be of the same frequency that we dealt with in this last year. But thank you.
Barry?
Yeah, you kind of answered it there, but so worked on this for a year, so now it's pretty well implemented, would you say? Other than the elk management plan, are there others that are coming forward there that we still, what's left? I mean,
Yeah, I think I would sum that best to say we've got a great start. I think any time we stop and say we got it whipped now is the time we're going backwards. I think we've got to continue to evaluate and improve on what we're doing. And again, the jump start was this first year, but we're going to continue on trying to make improvements where we can, utilizing the report as for the information that's contained in there. But we're going to continue to move forward every day, every month, every year.
that leadership program or courses, that is free to the individuals?
Absolutely. There are some costs associated with putting those, bringing those speakers in. Those are things that we absorb within our budget, your budget, I should say.
And how many people take advantage of that?
I think we, typically those courses, 25, 30, yeah, somewhere in that ballpark is what we can put into a single, not a single course, but a single curriculum or a class that would move through that coursework. And we can overlap those. I mean, we can get one going, and if there's sufficient interest, we could start another one. But again, we've got to weigh the costs associated with putting those programs on. But they're very valuable.
Yeah.
Investing in our people is the best way to improve our efficiency and to improve our effectiveness.
Okay, in the interest of, oh, go ahead, Gary.
Will you put this presentation on the website so people can access it?
Absolutely, we sure can. And I believe typically they're filmed or and recorded, so we can put the whole thing that we just gave to you out there.